Cool. All right, so looks like everyone's computer is on or almost on. Is yours on, Trevor? Yeah, just sleeping. Okay. So what we're going to do is we need to set up our preferences first inside of Maya, or inside of Windows, and then we can get into Maya. So on your computers, everyone in here has used a PC before, right? Yeah, no one. Okay, good. On your computer, you're going to open up the computer and you're going to go to the P drive. Now the easiest way that I do that, if you hit Window E and then in the left column it'll say P drive. Mine says D drive because I don't have a P drive. But. So on your P drive you're going to make a brand new folder. Make a new folder, call it your last name underscore W18. Inside your W18 folder, make a 2540 folder. Okay, so all the stuff for this class will go into the 2540 folder. All right, now we're going to go back to the P drive. And in the P drive, there should be a Maya folder. Delete the Maya folder off the P drive. So this is where Maya saves all of its preferences. So we're first going to get into Maya and we're going to start setting up some preferences. The preferences that we set up, we want them to be clean to start off, and we want to be able to make our own preferences and then make sure we save those every day. So we'll delete that folder. Now we can go into Maya. So if you just hit the Window key and then type in the word Maya, that should pop up. Unlike Cinema 4D, Maya does allow you to move your preferences. So like at your house, you have a folder whenever you open up Maya. In your documents usually that'll say Maya. Inside it will be Documents, Maya. Inside it will be 2018, which is the version. So if you had 2017, 16, 15, and so on, you would also have a folder for each one of those. This is the actual preferences folder. You can delete just this, or you can delete the entire Maya folder. Either way it works, okay? So we deleted the entire Maya folder, so that way we're starting off completely fresh. Maya saves all of its preferences in here, and then what we can do is every day before we leave, we can back those preferences up. When we come in, and the first thing we do is put the preferences back in there. That way anything that we've changed is still there. So that is awesome because if we make a hotkey, we make a shelf, we make a whatever, all of our stuff gets saved. I recommend too, before you leave, not only copying that Maya folder, but also deleting the Maya folder from there after you've copied it. Okay, I'll go over that when we get to the end of class, but backing it up and then removing it so that nobody else can use our stuff, because what typically happens is people work in Maya, they forget that your preferences are there, they didn't update them, they start working, and now they're working inside your folders. And you don't want that because then you end up with gigs of data that you don't need, okay? Cool. So there is the first window that typically pops up inside Maya, which is the What's New highlight settings. So you can say show this at startup and turn that off, and then hit OK. And then you can make this bigger. All right, so there's our Maya interface. So if you're new to Maya, just a quick rundown of what this is. So this, just like Cinema, is where we do most of our work, our modeling, our animating, our texturing, whatever else, right inside this main window. Up here, this area is called the shelf. We'll be adding stuff to the shelf that allows us to customize what we're doing. It's much easier in Maya to create customization. In Cinema, it was really limited as to what you could do. And here, literally every menu item I could put right in a strip. Like I constantly use these 10 things. I can put them right there as buttons that I can really quickly access. Even these menus up here, I can make my own menu and put my own menu up there if I want to. Okay. This at the top right now is our modeling menu. So some stuff we will model, simple stuff. if we are doing animation, we may want to switch this to animation. So click on that little animation thing and go there, and then you can see all the animation menus that are available. Some menus carry over one to the other. So everything from window back to file will carry back over depending on, or regardless of which menu you're on. And I believe bonus tools and on, yep, cache and on, there we go. So cache and on will also carry over to any menu that we're in. Over here on the left, these are all of our selection tools, move tools, rotates, and scales. On your hotkey list, you saw all of those, you can see all those on there. Basically from Cinema, it's like one letter over, okay? So if your hand was here, now it's just right there. So E is going to be your rotate, W is your move, and R is your scale. Get used to using those hotkeys because it'll just be a huge time saver instead of constantly switching back and forth over here. Also, what's different in Maya is you don't have to be on a specific select tool. You can be in any one of those tools and still select objects, which again is an awesome feature. All right, so let's make something real quick. So just go to your poly modeling shelf here, and you can just click on anything, just a sphere for now. Okay, so just so you can see, over here on the right, this is your channel box. So in Cinema, basically the bottom right of Cinema had attributes and where things are located. That's what the channel box is. It's actually used a lot more in Maya than it would be inside Cinema. And I guess it has a little bit different purpose. Further down, you'll see the layers. So we can actually create layers and then drop stuff onto different layers. So that's that. All right, cool. With your mouse in the center of the screen, tap the space bar. So in Cinema, what you would do is you would middle click with the mouse, and that would take you to this 4 view. In Maya, you simply just tap the space bar, and it does exactly what you just saw. Depending on where my mouse is now located, if I tap the space bar again, it will jump me into that view. So I tap it right over the side view, and I'm in the side view. I hit space bar again. Okay, very quickly I can move between all the different views. Okay. Now, instead of tapping the space bar, hold the space bar down. So now what this does is every single menu item inside of Maya, so modeling, animation, rendering, FX, rigging, rendering, I knew I forgot one. Every single one of those is listed right here. So this is a quick way. If we are wanting to model something, we can go to the modeling menu through here. If we're rigging, we can go through here. If we're going to the animations or whatever, we can get to everything through here. So this is called the hotbox, and it's extremely helpful. Now, even if we don't use any of these menus, we can use some of the hidden menus that are right there. So instead of us doing this, like I want to get to the front view, I don't want to do this because that takes too long, okay? I want to hold down the space bar, hold my left mouse right on the word Maya, and then I can switch to any one of my views, okay? So I can switch to the top view, the front view, whatever, very quickly. And this will definitely come in handy because when you animate something like a bouncing ball, you want to make sure it's staying on that ground plane as it's moving. If you're not paying attention to it, just so you can see, I'll take this here. Okay, so right there, we don't know if that ball is actually on the ground or what, because I just moved it kind of arbitrarily. It's not on the ground, it's floating. So we want to make sure that as we animate something, that if we are animating it, there it is on the ground, and as I move it, it's staying perfectly locked onto the ground. Okay, so again, stuff that we will use over and over again. Our time slider is right here on the bottom. This is our range slider. So our ability to control, like we want to only focus in on these few frames. If you've had After Effects class, which I'm pretty sure most of you have, that's like your work area. It lets you just kind of zone into that one spot. All right, so we're going to go to the far right of this. There's a little running man with a gear chasing him. Click that. This gets you to the preferences. This is the same preferences that you could get to going to Windows Settings Preferences. Right there, that's the same one. It just jumps you into it quicker. Start at the very top. And just so you can see a couple things that are inside here. So you can choose which is the default menu. Not that you need to do that, but you definitely could do that. You can turn things on, turn things off. If one of your menus disappears, there you go. So my top menu is now gone and some other stuff is gone. Inside here, I can bring all that stuff back. Okay, so that's an easy way to do that. I don't want to hold focus. What else? All right, I think the next thing we want to play with is our settings. Yep, so go down to your settings. Our animations we want to do, we want to keep them at 30 frames a second. So where it says time 24, we want to set this to 30 frames per second. Also pay attention to the up axis is Y. Inside of Maya, Y is the up direction. Inside of other 3D programs, Z can be the up direction too. It depends on which software you're in. So just make note of it. Also make note that we're in centimeters. If we take this to another application where we are concerned with that, we need to pay attention that it's centimeters and not feet or inches or meters. Let's see, that should be good there. All right, scroll down to where it says time slider. Oops, sorry, we skipped one. Files and projects. So how many people in here like to redo stuff over and over again? Wade, perfect. You'd like to or just get to. So this is where we can set up autosave. So if you go to the enable autosave, it will automatically save your file every however many minutes you've specified here. So if you want this to be every 5 minutes, then set it to 5. 10 minutes, set it to 10. Every time you do an autosave, unless you specify limit autosaves, it saves a brand new file inside of your folder. Okay? So what that means is after, if we're saving every 10 minutes and we've been working for 3 hours, how many files do we have? Any guesses? 18. Oh, so close. So we have 6 an hour times 3 hours, 18. All right, so we had 18 files. Not a huge deal. These files are pretty small. Some files will get bigger, okay? So when we get to a scene like our organic one where we have maybe 1 million of these characters running around, those files may be, let's say, 10 megabytes. 10 megabytes times 36 is 360 megabytes. That adds up pretty quick. Every time you come in, you're basically saving 1/3 of a gig to your folder and then trying to back that up. So I recommend limiting them if you feel like it. It doesn't matter to me. The interval here, you could also make this bigger. However far back you are fine with redoing, that's what that interval should be. So if you never ever want to have to redo something and you like clicking the continue button, set this to 1. If you're fine with having to redo the last 10 minutes, then just set that to 10 minutes or leave it at the default. Typically I don't have this on. I'll leave it on today just so you can see what happens. You could also throw these into a different folder, whatever, okay? So I recommend, again, having that on, putting that at 10, perfect. All right, so now go down to time slider. All right, so we are at 30 frames a second. We want to change our playback speed to 30 FPS x1. It used to be very simple. It would say real time, half time, or double time. I don't know why they've changed it. So now it's 30 frames per second times 1 is real time. 0.5 is, I'm assuming, half time. And then 2, I'm assuming, is double time. That could be wrong. It doesn't matter. So what this allows us to do is it allows us to see when we hit the play button our animation in actual real time. If we don't have that on, we have to wait until we render something out or play blast it before we can see what does it look like. So some cases we would want this on play reframe. For what we're doing, 30 frames per second times 1. What else? Undos. So go to your undo tab. How many undos are there in Photoshop? 1. Nope, it's just 1. Photoshop sucks for that. So it's 1 undo in Photoshop for whatever reason. You can go in the history and go back further. Maya allows you to actually specify a number of undos. So you can set it to infinite, meaning you have unlimited undos. You can set it to a finite number. So 50 is the default. As a beginner, I would set it to 200. Okay, 200 is a good number for beginner students, because what happens is you click something wrong and you don't realize you've clicked it wrong until 198 steps ago. Okay, and hopefully you can get all the way back there. Everything inside Maya is an undo. So if I have 5 items and I individually click each one, each selection is a separate undo. Okay, so just be aware of that too, that you hit undo, it's going to be a long time if you've done a lot of stuff. What else? GPU is fine, that's fine there, that's fine there. Okay, everything else is good, so you can just hit save. Cool. All right, let's go up to the top. One of these shelves here, so you can see how I can switch between the different shelves. One of these, I'm going to go to the custom tab, and that will be our tab. So I'm going to go to the little gear here and say shelf editor. And what we want to do is we want to rename this shelf with our last name. And then you can just hit save. Yes, sir. Right on this little gear, shelf editor. Okay, so this way, when we do save our preferences and we come back into Maya, if we see a shelf in there that is not our last name, something has gone wrong. Okay, this way we'll know, hey, there's my shelf, I can jump right into it. So now we want to add stuff to the shelf. There are certain things in Maya that you will use over and over and over again, like 10 or 15 or 100 times each time you come to class. So one of them is delete history. Okay, so if you watch me first and then you can do it, because you're going to do it wrong probably. They did in the last class. So I'm going to hold down Control and Shift. I'm going to go to Edit, Delete by Type, History, and then I'm just going to click right on that one time. Nothing happened that I could see. Okay? Behind this window, something happened. I'm going to let go with my other hand. I'm going to click off, and you'll see that I have this Delete History button right there. Okay? So now you try. Hold Control and Shift, and then go to that Edit, Delete by Type History. And then once you've done that, then click off and verify that you have that icon sitting inside your shelf. If you don't, go back to it and make sure you click on Delete History and not just let go on there. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sir? Yep, hold down Control Shift, Edit, Delete by Type, and then just click on the word History. Now, if you accidentally, because this is what happened last hour, nothing happens, so they click it again, and they click it, and they click it. Oh, there they are. And then you have all of these delete histories. It doesn't work any different having that many. So then you have to go through and just delete each one of these. Now, another neat thing about Maya is everything inside here, whoopsie, can't do it here? No. Everything inside here is a script, or it's calling a script. So what that means for us is if there's a sequence of things that we're constantly doing, let's say deleting history, center pivoting, and freeze transform. At some point, I may want to do all 3 of those things. I could actually take just those commands, put them into one button, and with one button, it'll do all 3 of those, which is pretty awesome. Other software do not allow you to do that. I wish Photoshop or Illustrator or any of those allowed it. Okay, so Control Shift again, modify center pivot. Cool. Modify center pivot. Still holding Control Shift, still in the Modify menu. Go to Freeze Transformations. Good. Okay. Still holding Control Shift. Go to Window and open Outliner. These little boxes next to some of these items that you see, those are option boxes. So for Play Blast, if I were to click on that, it would open up a separate box where I could type in my preferences for it and whatever my settings are. Now, another thing that is neat is if I hit Control Shift and I click on this option box, then that is my key. So every time I click the button, it'll actually pop open the option box that I could then set some stuff up in. So it's really awesome. So this and this are actually like 2 separate buttons. We don't need that one right now, but it's there. So holding Control Shift still, we're going to go to Animation Editors. We're going to grab the dope sheet and the graph editor. Okay, so we should have 6 things in here: edit, delete by type history, modify center pivot, modify freeze transform, window outliner, window animation editor graph editor, and window animation editor's dope sheet. Good? Cool. Silence usually means that everyone either is good or they just don't care. All right. So now that we have all of that there, we have our shelf set up, we have this stuff down there. We're going to make a project folder. So right now, if I were to look inside of my folder that we just made 2 minutes ago, there's nothing inside it. What I want to do is I want to create a folder structure that will help me stay organized inside of Maya. Typically, if we were in Cinema, we would do that right inside of here, but we don't need to do that because Maya will automatically do it for us. So we're going to stay in Maya. We're going to go down to File, and we're going to go to Project Window. Okay, so File, Project Window. And we're going to make a new project. Okay, so new project, we're going to call this your last name underscore playing. We'll just do a playing folder. And then for the location, you're going to pick your 2540 folder. Okay, so your current project should be your last name underscore playing. Your location should be your P drive, your last name W18, 2540. Oops, there's my save. I don't know where you're saving it to, or just the default. Okay. Cool, everyone's good there? All right, so you can hit accept. I'm going to show you what some of these will mean. Yes, ma'am? Just your last name underscore playing. All right, so now inside my 2540 folder, it's created this Sarcona playing folder. And inside that folder, it's created all of these other folders. So if at any point our files become unorganized, we need to close Maya down, reorganize our files, go back into Maya, and make sure everything is cool. It works best if you keep organized. So if something is not in a correct folder, you need to fix it as soon as possible so that you don't have issues down the line. Yes, sir.
Looks like I'm missing. Could you repeat what was up there?
You went to File, Project Window?
Oh yeah, I did that part. It's,
Oh.
It's those little boxes up there.
Where at? Here?
Yeah, up there.
Sure. Okay. Cool. So looking at this folder, these are all the folders that Maya will automatically create for us. Now we are not going to delve into most of these folders. There's 3 main ones that we're going to use. Scenes is where we're going to save all of our projects to. So when we save something inside Maya, it's going to go inside the Scenes folder, or it should go inside the Scenes folder. If anything goes outside the Scenes folder, close Maya down, put it in the Scenes folder, open Maya back up, and start working. Our source images is where we're going to put anything that is a material. So if we had a picture of a dog and we wanted to bring that into Maya, we would drop it into our source images, and then Maya would read from our source images, that's the picture of the dog. And then finally, images. This is where, when we render stuff out, this is where Maya is going to put all of our images. Okay? Those are the 3 main folders we're going to use. We also have an autosave. As I do any autosaving, or as Maya does it, this is the folder it's going to automatically drop everything into. Okay? So file 1, file 2, whatever. So just keep an eye on this folder because, again, it could get pretty heavy. From last class, let's see how many of these I have. There you go. So I have 8 of these from last class, and not too big, obviously, only a few kilobytes, but again, they could add up. Cool. All right, so now we have our project is set. Let's go to File and then say Save Preferences. Now, you don't have to go to Save Preferences every time, but if we didn't do Save Preferences and Maya crashed, everything we just did with our shelf, with our animation preferences would be gone. We'd have to redo it, okay? So that's the only reason we're doing that. All right, so if you already created an object, keep your object there. I'm going to make my object, so I just deleted it. So what we want to do is just play with how we set keyframes and how we move things around. So this is the sphere that we just created. It comes in at some default sizes. What I want to do is make sure this sphere is sitting right on the ground. So if I move this up with the move tool, so I hit W and then go to the move tool and move it, that looks like it's pretty close to sitting on the ground. Okay? Now what could happen, we put a floor in here, we put the ball on there, we render this out, and it turns out that our ball is actually floating because it's just a hair off the ground. It looks fake. Okay? So anytime we do this, we want it to make sure the ball is actually sitting on the ground. So two things we can do. I can switch to the front view. I can zoom in really close, same hotkeys as Cinema. And you see it's like off the ground. That's the ground right there. You can see there's just a hair bit of difference. I could then move this so that it sits right on the ground. Okay? So that looks like it's pretty close. It's not though. If I zoom in, again, it's like, oh, it's so close. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to perspective. This translate Y here is exactly linked up to the scale, the radius of this. So if I set this to 1, then I know it'll be perfectly sitting on the ground. Okay, so grab your sphere, set the translate Y to 1, it'll sit it right on the ground. Okay. Now what I want to do is I want to lock that in. I don't like the ball's translate Y being set to 1. I want it to be 0 when it's sitting there. So one of our little shelf buttons up here is freeze transform. So click that. And then what you'll see is that it freezes that value. So instead of this being 1 when it's here, it's now 0. So that's an easy way for us to lock it in to say that's where I want the new 0 point to be. Okay? So now what we can do is animate this just moving from one side to the other side of the screen. So pull it back to one side of the grid. And then we're going to set keyframes on this. Now before we set keyframes in any software, we have to know what time we're on. So looking in our timeline at the bottom, what time does it say? $1.25, okay? So 1.25 is not a good value. Like, where did Maya get that? When we changed it from 24 to 30, it automatically changes our start time to 1.25. So what we have to do is just go in here and choose 1 for all of these numbers. So 1, 1, and then we can rewind this all the way to an actual 1. Okay, so for these left 2 numbers, make sure those are 1, and then you can click and drag inside this and reset that to 1. Cool. So now we're back at 1. All right. When we set keys, all right. So now we have to set a keyframe. So if we were inside Cinema, do you remember how to set keyframes in Cinema? Yeah, you just click the little dots that were there. Okay, so there's a little dot next to translate X, Y, and Z, and we would just click the dots. Maya doesn't have any of those dots. Okay, if we were in After Effects, there's a stopwatch, and we would just click that. Right. So in Maya, what we can do is there's a few different things. So one of them is we can hit the S key. S is a hotkey for setting keyframes on everything that we have selected. Now, if I hit S, watch what happens on my screen. Nothing. Okay, so these should turn a color saying, hey, you just set a keyframe, and nothing happened. If I look down here where I have the 1 that I just typed in, you'll see that it says 1S. And what's happening is my cursor is still stuck in that window. So when I'm hitting S, it's just typing the letter S. So what I have to do is leave it at 1. I have to just click out in this window and then hit S. And then what happens is we get a keyframe. Okay? So you should be able to click out in that window, hit S, and then get a keyframe on that. Now, do you think you have to have the object selected when you set a keyframe? Yeah. Okay? Because we have 10 objects in our scene, Maya has to know which one we're setting keyframes on. So we set a keyframe. What are two things that you notice happen when we set a keyframe. Everything's red, right? So all of the stuff here turned red. All right, anything else?
Put a red line on the timeline.
Yep, a red line on the timeline. So there's two indicators that we just set a keyframe. Now the third one that you may not have caught is right here. This is the help area. It says result 10. That means that I just set 10 keyframes, okay? So that's something that I'm always kind of watching for to make sure that what I'm doing is working. Because let's say that I didn't like the position of this sphere and I move it. These are still red. This one turned a little pinky color. The red ticker is still here. If I think I hit S and it doesn't work, let's pretend I'm down here and I hit S again. I may think that I'm setting keyframes, but I'm really not. So I always look for that result just to make sure that, yes, you've set keyframes. And then I look over here to verify that the value is what I wanted it to be. Because if it's a different color, it's not a keyframe. Oops. So I will click here and hit S again, and now it's locked in. It says result 10, good to go. Okay? So frame 1, the sphere is on one side of our grid. There's my autosave. Let's go to frame 120. So you can just click on 120, or you can click and drag right inside here. You don't have to drag from 1. You can just drag literally wherever you want in the timeline and get to 120. Then we're going to move the sphere over to the other side, and then we'll hit S again. And then look for those indicators. Look for the little tick mark in the timeline. Look for everything to turn bright red. Look for the result 10. Okay, everything's good? You have all that stuff? Cool. All right, so now let's hit play and see what happens. I'm going to zoom out a bit so I can watch this. The play button is right there. There's a forward play and a backwards play. Just hit regular forward play. It's really exciting. So how many seconds is this? 4, right? 120 frames, 30 frames a second, 4. We don't need to do crazy math in the class, but we'll have to do some basic stuff just like that. Especially if we had something that we wanted to use later on in something else. Like if we created an animated walk cycle, we need to know how long walk cycles take, how many steps each one takes, okay? Cool, so that's pretty boring. So now I want to tweak these keyframes. So in our shelf, I hit the stop button. In our shelf, we have two things that will allow us to do that. One of them is the graph editor. That allows us to adjust the spacing between the keyframes and the values of the keyframes. A much simpler one is the dope sheet. So I'm going to click on the dope sheet. And I'm going to resize this so that I can see it better. Okay. All of the zooming features work the same in every one of these. So if you're in the graph editor or the dope sheet or whatever, if I hold down Alt and right click and drag, just like in Cinema, I can zoom in and out. If I hold down Alt and middle click and drag, I can pan left and right. Okay? So whatever tool I'm in, those tools work exactly the same. So what this shows me is basically a summary of all my keyframes. So the object I've selected is a sphere. If I don't have it selected, it doesn't show up. If I select it, it'll say, okay, here's the sphere. You have keyframes at this point, and you have keyframes at that point. Notice how I'm marking the entire keyframe. If I click on it, it doesn't always work. Only when I'm demoing will it always work. Okay? Typically, you just want to marquee it. Now, this one up top is a summary of all of them. So if I had 15 items selected and I wanted to grab all the keyframes, I could grab that one, and it would let me grab all the ones that are in the list, not just that specific one. Okay? So that's a good way if I'm lining things up and moving things up so they're all synced together, to use that top line. For what we're doing, we can just grab this bottom one. Okay? So we grab the bottom one, and I want to move it back. Right now it's taking us 4 seconds, we said. I want it to take 2 seconds. So where am I going to move that to? 60, right? So we're at 120, so we're going to move it to 60. You can't left click and drag this. You have to middle click and drag. So after I highlight it, I make sure I'm in the Move tool by hitting W. and then I middle click and drag and bring this back to about 60. You can see the little time marker on the bottom. And then you can hit play again, and then you can look at that animation. Good? Everyone's at 60? Cool. Okay, so this is the quickest way to take keyframes and just move them around. As a beginning animator, you may not know how long something should take. So my ball moving across the screen, should it take 2 seconds? Should it take 4 seconds? Should it take 3 hours? I just don't know. So a lot of times what you're going to do is just set placeholder keyframes and then come back and start tweaking things. Okay? Don't be afraid to play with this. The more you play with these kinds of things, the more comfortable you will get with it, the better your animations will look because you're more comfortable playing with that tool. And again, these things are not going to go away. We're just going to continue using them. Sweet. So we moved the end one. We could also move the front one. You don't need to do this, but just so you can see, you can move the front one too. Okay? Now what this does is it controls simply the spacing between keyframes. At frame 0, or frame 1, we're at this point. At frame 60, we're at this point. If we stretch that out, it's going to take a longer time. We bring them together, it's going to take a less amount of time. So let's close the dope sheet. Now we can go to the graph editor. So click on the graph editor. So if you remember from After Effects class, in After Effects they allowed you to switch between a traditional graph editor and then you could also switch to a speed graph. Maya does not have the ability to switch to a speed graph. You just work with a traditional graph editor. Again, something that will be confusing at first, especially if you're not used to it, but will get easier the more you play with these tools. Okay? So in the dope sheet, it took all of our attributes that we had keyframes on and compressed it to a single square. That's why that's easier, because it's in a single square. In here, in the graph editor, it doesn't. It shows you every single one of the attributes because they all have different values. So how many attributes did we set a keyframe on? 10, right? How many did we need to set a keyframe on? 1, right? Because it just moved from in one direction straight across, okay? So if we look at this, all of these, translate Y, translate Z, rotate X, Y, Z, scale X, Y, Z, and visibility, all of those have keyframes, but they don't need to have keyframes. They're just going to get in the way, okay? When we hit S, it sets keyframes on everything. Eventually, we'll learn how to filter that out so it only sets keyframes on the one attribute we want, okay? For now, just marquee these lines that are kind of flat in the center and hit the delete key, and that will erase the keyframes. That way we don't accidentally start moving those around, because then that could really screw us up. All right, so now we have our graph. Now along the top side, this is all of our frames. So we have frame 1, we have a keyframe. Frame 60, we have a keyframe. That's as far as it went. This way here is our value, okay? Now again, this is something that you have to get used to looking at it, because translate X, we're watching it go from left to right. So in this sense, that looks exactly like what it's doing. It's going from here to there. If I switch this to that though, well, now it's going to be confusing because it's going, at me. If I switch it around to the other side here, now it looks really confusing because the time is like switched, okay? So you have to just ignore the fact that this is going left to right and just kind of focus on what it's doing inside here. All right, so what it's doing at the start of this, anyone want to take any guesses what's happening over here in this area? Starting out slow. Okay, so if you remember from After Effects, they had the thing called easy ease, right? So we didn't have a keyframe that just went like boom, you're going 60 miles an hour. It would gradually pick up speed. So that's what this is doing there. It's gradually picking up speed, hitting that speed, and then what's it doing at the end? Yep, slowing down again, okay? So by default, every single one of our keys in Maya will do exactly that. They will do this ease in, ease out. Now, for most things, like in After Effects, we typically want that to happen. but we also want to exaggerate some of these movements. I may want him to go super slow and then whiz across the screen really fast, okay? So I want to be able to control that. So if you look at these handles here, these are very similar to like you would have inside of After Effects or inside of Photoshop. So if I click, or if I marquee a point, and this is going to be, again, this drives me crazy that they haven't fixed this. If you marquee and you're actually like too close to this, it'll move that keyframe, so just be aware of that. So I always do a big marquee to select the keyframe, and then I do another big marquee to grab just the inner handle, and then I use my middle mouse and just move this down. Okay, so do that to yours. So big marquee to grab your keyframe, big marquee to grab the handle, and then middle mouse button drag to make a little arc. Okay, and then you can hit the play button again. If you looked at your hotkey sheet, you know what the hotkey is for play button. I don't know if it's on there. I think it's Alt V is what it is. I don't know if it's on there. So if you hold Alt and you hit V, that will hit the play button. If you hit Escape, that will stop. Or if you hit Alt V, that will also stop it. Okay, so you should have a considerably different animation now. It should start off super slow and then ramp up right at the end and then smack the wall pretty much. Now this is important because we need to understand how do we get stuff to move. A good animation isn't all just the same speed of movement. It's fast, it's slow, it's stuff that's halting, it's stuff that is dragging on. You have to have a mixture of stuff in here to make it look correct. And this is how we do that in the graph editor. Now I couldn't do this in the dope sheet. Okay, I can't do any of this kind of stuff in the dope sheet. I can't do any of this anywhere else pretty much except exactly right here in the graph editor. Once you become proficient at animating, there are people who just animate in the graph editor. Like they'll just create all the keyframes right here and position them and then move them and then tweak their handlebars. They don't even play in here. This is just a preview area for them to see what it's looking like. Sweet. So I'm going to hit stop. Now we do have to be careful. If I drag this handlebar too far, what do you think is going to happen? That's what you would think. It doesn't though, right? Because we're looking at the translate X. So this is where it gets confusing because the X is just left and right. That's all we're doing. So when it moves this way, the ball is moving in one direction. When it moves that way, it's going to be moving in a different direction. So if I do that, it's actually going to go backwards and then come forward. Okay, so we'll rewind. We'll hit play. Whoop. And then it comes back. Okay. Now that can be very effective if we wanted to add something at the top. So let's say our ball, we just wanted it to like kind of bounce up and hit something. We could just have it come to that point and then go right before it and just have the graph kind of peak. Okay. So, oops, let me hit that. I can also grab this handle too, and I can play with the handle like that. Right? So there's lots of things that I can do inside the graph editor to tweak what this thing is looking like. Your goal when you set keyframes is to have as few keyframes as possible while still maintaining the motion that you want. Okay? So there's no way that I would want to, I could set keyframes for this to get that exact motion, but it's easier to go in the graph editor and just tweak the handlebars until I get it exactly where I want. I'm just going to reset that because now that looks kind of weird. Okay. All right, based on what we've done so far, do you think we're using frame by frame animation or do you think we're using pose to pose? Pose to pose, right? We set up one keyframe, we set up the other one, and the software kind of figures out what's in between, right? So 3D is going to work like that for most of the stuff that we do. When animation first started, what they were doing is that people that knew how to use a software weren't traditional animators. They didn't know how to animate stuff. So it was faster for them to hire animators who were doing this for years and train them on the software. But the way that they would do it is that they would still go frame by frame and grab all the stuff just like a puppet or just like a stop motion and move the pieces around like that. Now they do it this way, okay? At Toy Story, they will go pose to pose, set their in-betweens, and then set those in-betweens and literally go every single frame and check every single feature. What does their eye look like? What is the other one? What's the eyebrow doing? What's the mouth doing? What's the nose doing? Every single attribute of every character they're checking out of every frame. A 7-second animation, a Pixar quality 7-second animation takes 40 hours to do. 40 hours just to do the animation, not to render it out, just to do the animation part. And that's if it works. They may have to go back and say, fix this and fix that and whatever. Okay, cool. All right, so now up here at the top of the graph editor, we have some other things that we can play with. So I'm just going to make this bigger so you can see it a little bit better. So right here, these are all the default tangents, okay? That's what this is called, is the ease in and ease out. That's called a flat tangent, okay? So if I go over here to flat and I click on this, we get that same thing back that we just had a second ago. We could also click on spline, and that will give us this. We can also go to clamped, which gives us that. We can go to linear. We can go to stepped. Okay, some of these will look exactly the same as the other ones, but that's just because we only have 2 keyframes. As you add more keyframes, that will alter what these graphs look like. Most of the time, you're going to come in here for anything you have animated and tweak these graphs by hand. Use these as a starting point and then graph them by hand, okay? So in this case, let's go to that one. What do you think this one is going to do? Nope. Nope. Remember, this is the value, okay? So looking at that line, what is the x value going to do?
Not gonna move.
Exactly. The x value is not going to move until we hit that keyframe, and then it's going to go. So let's check it out and see. So we rewind, we hit play, nothing, 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 boom. And then it pops. Now, something like that, I haven't found a use for that, for that on the ball. Now, there are other items we may animate where we would use something like that. So if I go here to my particles and I say create a particle emitter right there. Okay, so this thing here, you can see particles kind of fly out of it. I'm going to set a keyframe on the emitter itself. So remember, S sets keyframes. Another way we can set keyframes is by hitting right-click on an attribute and just saying key selected. Okay, so I turn that keyframe on there. I'm going to go up to 60. I'm going to set this to, let's say, a lot, and then key it again, and then go up to 65 and turn that off. Okay, so what should happen now with our graph is it's going to build up to that and then gradually move off. I'm going to hit play. Oops. This is one of those times where I want to have play every frame. There we go. All right, so that's the look that I'm getting with those particles is this. It's like a shower of particles that eventually, right here, will turn off. There they go. Okay, not very exciting. Now, if I were to take this and make it that stepped kind, okay, still not terribly exciting. I'm going to go down to the speed, and I'll set this to, let's say, 20. That might be too much, but we'll find out. Oh, it's amazing, right? It's gorgeous. Okay, so that's something that I would use that for. I could also use it for a light. My character walks into the room, he hits the light switch. It shouldn't gradually move up. It should just switch on. Okay, so that's where we, again, could use something like that, where it would be a stepped type setup. Oops. All right, now the other thing that we could do, so let's just show that too. I'm going to grab a point light. Okay, I'm going to go to the intensity and turn it off, and then there it is on 1, right? So I'm going to key this at 101. I'm going to key it at 102. And there it is, okay? So I've keyed it right next to each other. So what this will do is it'll do the exact same thing that the emitter did. It'll go from one value and then just jump right to the next value. So I hit play. Right? But this is a little bit too hard to work with because those keyframes are basically like right on top of each other. If I need to move one of those or I need to adjust when that happens, it can be not terribly difficult. 100. Where are you even at? Point light selected. There it is. So you can see how they're like right on top of each other. In order for me to even separate them, I have to grab one of these. See, now it doesn't want to play nice. There you go. I have to click on one of those and move it. So if I had something that was maybe flickering on and off, that could be very annoying. So that's where I would typically use that step 1 in order to do that. Cool. All right. So we have this thing going like that. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to tweak these even further. I want to be able to really exaggerate this. This gives me a little bit of exaggeration, but what if I wanted this to come right here without it doing that, without it going like way underneath? I could fight it and try to go here and try to push that up, or I could fight it by going into, you know, it's way down here there and moving this back to, what is that, negative 17 point. And then set a key there. I could really try to fight it by doing that or, you know, doing this by hand, but that's not the way to do it, okay? So there is a stupid thing that we have to do. I've never found a reason why I can't do it. I want to, just like After Effects and Illustrator and all those, I want to pull this handle out. Because by pulling that handle out, I can really get some good control over it. Let me just reset this because I kind of screwed up my view. There we go. Okay, so I want to grab this handle and middle drag and just have that handle stretch way far out. So I want to create this really sharp arc. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the entire graph. So grab your entire graph. And I'm going to go to Curves inside the graph editor, Curves menu, and say Weighted Tangents. And then I'm going to say Tangents, Free Tangent Weight. Free Tangent Length. They decided to change the name of that for no reason at all. So Curves, Weighted Tangents, Tangents, Free Tangent Length. And now what I can do is I can grab the handlebars and I have much more control over what they're doing. So now if we watch this, you'll see really, really slow, and then boom, it slams right at the end of it. Okay, and then of course we could swap that around too. I could make the fast happen right at the beginning and then the slow happen right at the end. So wherever we see a large vertical movement, we're going to get a lot of motion. Wherever we see a long horizontal movement, that's where we're going to get not a lot of motion. Okay? As we start playing with these assignments, we start doing the bouncing ball in the Game of Thrones and then the stick, you'll really start to see how these things come into play into making these animations feel a lot more fluid. Okay? Sweet. All right, so you can close your graph editor wherever you have your stuff is good. We have over in the channel box, we should have our one attribute is still in that pinkish salmony color. Everything else is wide open. Further below that, we have something called transform geometry, and then we have a polysphere. So one thing inside Cinema that we used to do is whenever we created an object, we couldn't edit the components of that object until we hit the C key on the keyboard or went it to make editable. So on here inside of Maya, you can do that. I can go to this polysphere and I can change what that sphere looks like even after the fact. So I can adjust the subdivisions on it if I wanted to do that. If I want to change the radius, I could change that as well. Obviously, I could just scale it for the radius too, but it keeps this area clean when you just use the radius. Okay. When I'm all done with this stuff, I'm like, this is plenty of subdivisions, the radius is perfect. I delete history, and it gets rid of that. Okay. So grab your sphere, just delete the history on it to clear those areas out. And then what we're going to do is just create a ground plane. So create polygons planes. And then just scale this up huge. Like literally like enormously huge. All right, so just for sizing purposes, mine is about 4,000 by 2,000. 4,000 in the X and then about 2,000 in the Z. Anytime we create something in 3D, you don't want it to look like it's in 3D. So try to push it so that you have this environment that seems to go on forever. Okay. You'll also notice that the plane itself, the polyplane, has a input as well. We don't need all of these divisions. Okay. Anytime we have extra divisions is just a waste on resources. So we go to the polyplane and we reset these to 1 and 1. Oops. And I clicked F1 to open up my help menu apparently. It's coming. There we go. Sweet. All right, so there's my polyplane. Here's my sphere. Gorgeous. What we want to do now is we want to create some lights inside of our scene. Under Arnold, this is where we're going to be creating all of our stuff. So Arnold is the rendering engine inside of Maya. In Cinema 4D, it has a couple rendering engines you can use. Maya has its own plus some other ones. Arnold is the one that comes pre-built into it. So under Arnold itself, I'm going to go to Arnold Render View. Now what you're seeing here is this is what the rendering looks like. So typically what you can do is take this screen and drop it onto your other screen so that you can see your actual workspace and move around. I can't do that because I only have one screen. I'm going to click on this little play button here, and what this means is that it's going to constantly update to show me what my rendering is looking like. So right now I have no lights in my scene, so I can't see anything. So I'm going to go over to Arnold, go to Lights, and I'm going to create a sky dome. And instantly you'll see that, hey, there's that sphere. Now with just the sky dome, what's happening is there's basically this huge white sphere projecting light onto my object. And then way down here at the bottom, we're getting a little bit of shadow / ambient occlusion hitting right there. So it actually looks good enough for now, but we'll tweak some stuff. So now I'm going to click on the ground, and I'm going to assign a material. So inside of Cinema, there was a separate materials manager at the bottom. You would double click, create a material, and drag it onto your stuff. So Maya has that, but it's in a different window. Just to save resources, I'm not even going to open it. So if I want to assign a different material to this plane, I'm going to right click on it and hold. Go down to where it says assign new material way at the bottom. And this will bring up the assign new material window. Okay. Here are Maya materials. Here are Arnold materials. Since we're rendering in Arnold, we want to use Arnold materials. And for most of the stuff that we're going to use, the standard surface, AI standard surface shader is the one we're going to use. So click on the AI standard surface. Okay. Now, two things happened. One, our ground probably got a little bit lighter inside of our render view. Yep. We got some reflections and some other stuff happening here. And then two, this window popped open. So inside of Maya, they have this thing called the attribute editor, which allows us to control all these different features of that specific object. So under the far right tab, it says AI standard surface. That's everything about that specific object, okay? So if I click on that, I should be able to control some of the features to it. Now, just to give you a heads up where things are at, you can go to presets and you can use one of these presets as a starting point if you want to. For now, don't do that just because it's complicated. You may click on something that screws up your stuff. So just don't worry about the presets now, but they're there. We need to choose a color. So I'm going to click on the color swatch and pick a color for my ground. So I'm going to give it some saturation. I'm going to give it some hue. That looks good. I can drop the value down too if I want to. Nope, I actually liked it right there. It's good. Cool. I will save again because Maya's asking me to save. So this is giving me the color information. You'll see that we do have some reflection happening here. If I go to the weight and I pull the weight down, you'll see how that reflection goes away. Okay? So the specular weight is controlling the reflection. So this white back here is just that big sphere reflecting into this. We also have a color of this. You don't need to change the color. You can leave that. But you would typically adjust the roughness. So right now this is a pretty sharp looking reflection. As I crank the roughness up, like that, you'll see that the roughness, or the reflection now looks a bit rougher. It looks like it's a little bit more spread out. Okay? It also helps us be able to read our item a lot better. When this is all the way here, it's very competitive. This is actually darker than that, so my eye is actually drawn to the reflection more than it's drawn to the object itself. So by pulling that roughness up, I'm darkening this, but making this stand out a bit more. Okay? So pull the roughness up. On mine, it's 0.4. A good enough value so we can still see that there is a reflection without getting rid of it is good. Okay? So for the ground, that's enough. That's perfect amount of stuff happening to the ground. So I'm going to not close the render view. I'm going to click on the sphere now, and then right-click Assign New Material. Okay? So grab your sphere, right-click Assign New Material, and then go back to the Arnold shader, go back to the standard surface. And now the same stuff that we just did to the ground, we're going to do to the sphere. So I'm going to go to the color of the sphere. I'm going to pick a color. This one I don't mind too much reflection, but it still is maybe a little bit too much. There you go. So I pulled my weight down to the reflection to 0.4, and I pulled the roughness up to about 0.7. Again, you don't need to get the exact numbers. Just make sure that it looks at least decent enough that we can see where these two items are. We don't want them to be competing for each other. In the 12 Principles of Animation, the very last one is solid drawing, being able to see the stuff. The second to last one is solid drawing. The last one is appeal. So the second to last one, make sure you can see the stuff. If I chose a blue for this, that makes that ball very difficult to read. I can see it, but not as well as I can when I look at it like that. That makes the ball stand out a bit more. Okay? So I can get my channel box back simply by clicking on one of these tabs on the right, or I can get the attribute editor back by clicking on another tab. Okay? So you always have that option to go back to that and change it if you desire. Cool. All right, so everything in Maya has attributes. If I marquee this background and I go to the attribute editor, that sky dome has attributes. I can control the brightness of this. I closed my Arnold view, dang it. click that again. There we go. So I can control this. So if I take the brightness up, this goes crazy. If I take the brightness down, obviously it's going to dim it. I can also go to color temperature. And instead of this being a white color, that's what this is right now, or was before a white color, it's using color temperature. If you remember from probably physical science class, there's a thing called the Kelvin color scale. And basically, all lights emit a specific color. So the cooler colors are in the warmer colors are in 2000 to 3000. The cooler colors are 4600 and up, okay? So right now, if I switch back to Maya, this is at 6500. That's hitting about in the blue area is where that light's coming off of. So if I crank this color down, you can see very easily how I can switch this from one color value to another color value. Okay, I could also just click on that color and change the color too. That's also a possibility. This just makes it much more simple. Just click that, drag it, and then you're good. Okay. So everything in Maya has attributes that we can edit and tweak. All of these too, if I right click on it, you can see how I can even set keyframes. So if I wanted this to look like the time of day was changing, I could use that as a driver to control my animation or control my lighting in my scene. You could also lock stuff, not that we need to lock that, but you could. You can change the exposure. We don't need to worry about that right now. All right, that's good. Okay, good enough for what we're doing. All right, so now let's set up a camera inside of our scene. So far, as we've been rotating and moving around, we've been moving a camera, okay? So we can totally use the camera that we're currently in as the camera we render out of, but it's never a good idea to do that because we may want to jump back into it and do something else, or we may move it on accident. So under the hotbox, which is that space bar again, if you hold down the left key on the word Maya, you can go to New Camera. And what that does, it creates a brand new camera exactly where you are sitting. Now the way that we would know that is on the bottom of this, it says perspective 1. Before, a second ago, it's just said perspective. So now we know we're in a brand new perspective camera. If you click over here, oops, where'd that go? Let me close that real quick. If you click over there on the far left, you'll get the outliner. This shows you all the objects inside your scene. So that's another way to kind of verify what you have inside your scene. There's my perspective camera. There's my dome. There's my plane. There's my sphere. Okay, so there's all the objects that we would have. So we have perspective 1. What we want to do is just kind of set this up. Oh, there it is. I was right on top of the other camera because I'm still in the other perspective. There we go. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this other view. I don't know why I have that. I don't need that. I'm going to set this up so that I can render this out. I need to see how far the sphere goes. So you can see it's out of frame. So I'm going to go here. So it's in frame. Oops, and there it's out of frame. So I'm going to zoom out or maybe rotate a bit. And so what I'm trying to do is find an angle that I can have my camera so that this sphere stays in the view the entire time. Okay, so that looks like it's pretty good. I don't want to go too straight on because then I'm losing that perspective of it moving. I want to have some sort of neat angle where it shows moving like that. That's good. Okay, so I just rotated my camera until that fit. Now, I don't actually know if what I'm seeing is what's going to render out. Okay, if I took this view and I did this, that's not what my rendering is going to look like. Okay, I need to click on, there's a blue ball right here. I'm going to click on that. So this is the resolution gate. I click on this. This bar and this bar are the extents of my render. And then the top and the bottom are the extents of my render. So I'm just going to verify that as I hit play, that this still is inside my view. Maybe I even want to move it in a little bit more. That's good. Cool, we have a sphere, it's moving, it's colored. Cool, all right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set up our render settings. So on the very top of this, you'll see another blue circle with a hole in the middle of it. Just for future reference, this is the hypershade. So if you click on that, that will take you to where the materials are. So just like Cinema has all those materials laid out, here's Maya's. They're a bit more complex, so I'm not getting into that today, but that's where they are. Next to that, there's a little clapper with a gear. We're going to click on the clapper with the gear. Okay, so these are our render settings. So very similar to what Cinema 4D has and any other 3D program. Basically, here's your stuff that's in 3D. What do you want out of 3D? And this is what we have to set up. So under file name prefix, let's just call this test scene. And then hit enter. Okay, our image format is going to be an EXR. In the intro class, we used a TIFF or a PNG or a JPEG. Hopefully not, maybe. EXR is what we're going to use here because it has more information inside of it. Our frame animation extension is going to be name.number.extension. Now before, you guys said you didn't like to redo things, so make sure that you do this correctly, otherwise you have to redo that part. So name.number.extension. Okay, it's the third one from the top of the list. All right, scrolling down further, we have a start frame and an end frame. What's our start frame? 1. What's our end frame? 60. Okay. Just for fun, let's set that to 65, just in case someone didn't set it right to 60. Okay. You'll notice that there is a by frame here. If we had a complex animation that's, let's say, 3,000 frames, we may just want to render out every 10th frame just so we can see what it looks like, or every 100th frame just to see what it looks like. So that's something, too, that you can do inside here to see what your frames are looking like. Renderable camera. Which camera are we rendering through? I have 2 of them listed. You guys have 2 listed or just 1? Yeah, 2. All right, we have perspective and perspective 1. So our first one that we created was perspective. That was just the default when we make a scene. Perspective 1 is the one we actually lined up. So if I look down here, that's perspective 1. So I wanted trash can perspective because I don't need that one rendered out. Maya will actually render out all of the stuff from one camera and then go back and render out all the stuff from the other camera too. We don't want that. Under image size, this should default to 960 by 540. So we just leave it at that. The bigger we go, the longer it's going to take. So 960 by 540 is a good size. If you're working in industry, depending on the project, you may work at something smaller or incredibly large. Okay, they'll let you know. All right, so all of this in this area is generic stuff for every single renderer you use. Okay, whether we're using Arnold or Maya or some other third-party renderer, all of this would be exactly the same. Under the Arnold renderer, we go there. This is our quality settings, okay? So I'm going to open up my Arnold renderer again. Click the play button. Okay, so right now you can see there's a lot of grain inside my scene. Okay, you can see all the little grainy pieces that are inside this here. Doesn't matter how much I pull my settings up, some of that grain is never going to go away until I made my image bigger, okay? If I had a 50 pixel image and I zoomed in on it, making that 50 pixel image 5 million pixels isn't going to make those go away. I need to up my settings or something. Oops. There we go. Come on. There it is. Okay, so just be aware that if you zoom in too close, those pixels are going to be pixels. We want to look at this basically from a 1-to-1 perspective. So I always click that. Okay. Okay, you don't need to have your render view up if you don't need to see it, because they're pretty much going to be the same. So we have a couple different things here that we could adjust. If we take the camera AA down, okay, this is done. That's what that looks like. Okay, this is called anti-aliasing, and what it's going to do is all of these edge pixels, how they blend together, it's just eliminating that blending. So as I turn this up, you can see how some of that noise goes away. Some of the noise goes away. Okay? Now if I crank this up all the way, there's going to be a point where it is good enough. Okay? 10 isn't going to do anything much more than 3 would do or 2 would do. Okay? So I'm going to take my camera AA to 3. I'm going to take my diffuse up to 3 and my specular up to 3. So 3, 3, 3. And those settings should be sufficient enough for this rendering. Okay, so before it took 4 seconds, now it takes 7 seconds. And then just so you can see the quality of that, here it is at 4 or at 3. So if I set this to 2, let me set all these to 2. There you go. So there it is at 2. You can definitely see it grain throughout it. 3, 3, and 3. That's what 2 pretty much look like. It's still rendering because I can see it says rendering right here. That looks much nicer. Okay? So make sure that your stuff doesn't look like crap when you render it out, because then you're just wasting your time. Cool. So that is good enough. I'm going to go down to motion blur, and I'm going to enable motion blur. Now what this is going to do is it's going to take our animation, and if it's at this point at frame 1 and this point at frame 2, it'll create this blur between those frames so that we can actually see that animation happening. Okay? So it gets this kind of look, so it's a bit more impactful. If I went to a frame where it wasn't moving, let's say 95, you'll see that there is no motion blur on that because it's been sitting still. At frame 60, it's pretty much stopped at frame 45. It's pretty much stopped at frame 25. There's a little bit at frame 12. There's a bit more. And at frame 1, there's a whole lot because he moved really fast at the beginning and slow at the end. Now under position, if you look at the way this motion blur looks, it's blurry on both sides. It's blurry here in the front and it's blurry there in the back. And it's pretty solid right in the center. This is set to center frame, so that's what it's doing. I typically want to have this set to end of frame. Oops, too far. And what that does, it gives me a bit more solid right in here and a bit softer on that side. Because as the object's moving forward, it's a bit traily on the back. So that's what I want that to be. You can also take this length up. I'll make it exaggerated like 5, and I'll move this over here. And what this will do is it'll blur it up a bit more. Not a huge difference at this point. If I set this back to 0.5, oops. And it's just a bit tighter. Okay. So you can leave that at 0.5, but set this position to end of frame. And what else? Keys should be good. He's going in a pretty straight motion. If he was going around an arc like this, so you can see it, and at one point he's here, another point he's there, if this is set to 2, we would have a key here and a key there, and we would miss the blurriness of that arc. So we want to set that higher so that we see the blur flowing up it. Arnold has some pretty decent information online. If we go to now Edge, Arnold motion blur. That's it. So they have a video there. That's not what I wanted. I wanted the. Maybe that's what I want. Yep, there it is. So here's the motion blur inside of Arnold. No, that isn't it. All right, let's get rid of this. There it is. On the Solid Angle, who makes Arnold, their website. There's motion blur. Here's what each one does, and they will show you too all the settings. So here it is. So here's this object moving. That's 2 keyframes. Here's 4 keyframes, so it's kind of like blocky there. And then here's 8 keyframes. So you can definitely see the blurriness of that. Here's start on frame, so the blur is happening after it. Here's center of frame, and then here's end of frame. So you can see where the ball is in this relationship. We want it to be on the end of the frame, so the trail is behind it. Sweet. All right, so we can close that. Do we want to close it? Yeah, we'll close it for now. Good enough. Okay, so we have animated an object. We've set up our camera. We have a light in the scene, which is the sky dome. We'll add other lights in later projects. We've never actually saved the scene. It's auto-save, but never actually saved, so we should probably go to Save Scene. And if it doesn't put it inside of your Scenes folder when you go to save, go into your folder, go into your Scenes folder, and then call it your last name underscore ball animation, or whatever you want to call it, underscore 001. There we go. All right, so now our file is saved, our animation is set up, we're ready to actually render this thing out. So under the rendering menu, if you want to switch to that, you can, or you can hold down the space bar to get to the hotbox and find the render menu from here. Either way. You're going to go to render, and then you're going to go to render sequence option box. Okay, so either up here, render sequence option box, or you're going to hold down the space bar, render sequence option box. So this is going to say I want to render the current camera, which is perspective 1, or we can choose which one we want. Everything else is all set up. Then we hit render and close. And then what Maya is going to do is it's going to go through each one of the frames, and it's going to render out each one of our frames. Arnold has a thing. Arnold is free for Maya users if you render out a still image. Okay, so if we just rendered out a still flat image, it's free. If we did what's called a batch render, you get watermarks all over it that say Arnold, and it looks pretty disgusting. However, if you render out frame number 1, then you go to frame 2 and render it, then you go to frame 3 and render it, then you go to frame 4 and 5 and 6 and render them out individually, there is no watermark. So Autodesk made a workaround, so it does this. So it just lets it go and it goes along. Now we can see that it's rendering here, so we want to keep an eye on it, obviously, so that it still looks good. We want to make sure that the object's moving. Maybe we picked the wrong camera, maybe something went wrong, who knows. We can also see down here that it's updating the time. Now, it's because we have motion blur, it's going to like 8.5 seconds. And then it'll go to 10, and then it'll go back to 9.5 seconds. Then it'll go to 11, and then go to 10.5 seconds. If at any point we need to stop this, we can hit the escape key, and it'll stop rendering, and then we can fix whatever we need to, and then just render it again. If for some reason we, let's say the ball for some reason just didn't show up. We hit escape, we figured out why the ball didn't show up, fix it, and then we render it out again. Any of the files that were already there are still in our folder. When we re-render, it just overwrites them. So you don't need to go in and delete them or clear them out. It'll just automatically remove or overwrite on top of those. All right, so let that go. Let's take a 5-minute break, or 10-minute break, depending on how long that takes. Then when we come back, we'll take these and throw them into After Effects, and then you can see how to make an actual movie out of these. All right, so once your rendering is done, what happens is all of those individual frames go into your images folder. So I'll show you where mine are. There is my P drive, 2018, 40, playing, images. There they are. So that's every one of my images. So this is, each image of mine is 3.5 kilobytes or 3.5 megabytes. So that gives me 200 megabytes for 65 frames, okay? So on that first day handout when I said we're going to have a lot of files, that's what I meant by we're going to have a lot of files, because there's so much stuff that goes into these scenes. All right. So then what we need to do is we need to take these individual files and assemble them. So what we're going to do is open up After Effects. So even if yours is still rendering, you can open up After Effects and then proceed with the rest of the stuff as it gets finished. We're done inside Maya, so you can save your stuff in Maya and close that.
Do you think man will ever walk on the sun?
We're still waiting. All right, we got more.
Why does you choose dogs to decide where bombs is? Why don't you choose a more intelligent animal like a dolphin?
We're still waiting. All right, we got more.
We know this is a generalization, but why is all skeletons involved in evil stuff?
All right, they're up now. Cool. All right, so who has not used After Effects before? Everyone has. Perfect. Okay. So this is pretty much the same process that we would do inside the intro program. Close your After Effects stuff there. We double click inside of this project window. And then we go and find our footage. 40 playing images. So remember, it's going to be right inside your images folder. And then you should have a bunch of individual pictures. So even if yours isn't done rendering, you can still do this part. And then when it is done, then you can just say reload, and it'll reload all of your images. Okay? So I'm going to click on any one of these. Don't click on all of them. That's a no-no. Just click on any one of these images. And what we should see in this right side here is that it says Open EXR Sequence. That means that it's going to bring in a sequence, not just a single image. And then we import. All right, we rendered this out at 960 by 540. How many frames per second did we use? 30. So what we want to do is check up here that we're at 960 by 540 and that we are 30 frames a second. Is everything cool there? Okay. Now, just for giggles, if that wasn't correct, we would right click and interpret it and go to main, and then we could specify right here what that is. Your home computer may default to something else if you set your After Effects preferences to 24 or 50 or whatever. So just be aware of that. Now what we can do is take this and just drag it down to the new composition. And then we can hit the space bar to hit play, and then we can see our animation. So looking at mine, how exciting does it look? Not that exciting. There's a lot of stuff that we could do to change this. It actually doesn't even look like the ball is moving. It actually looks like the camera is just getting closer to it, right? The ball doesn't roll, so the ball obviously should roll. The ball doesn't have any interesting, there's no bouncing, there's no anything to it. It simply is just moving across the screen. So it's a fun little project just to go through the processes of here's how we would model something in Maya, here's how we use the interface, here's how we texture and do some basic lighting and animation and this. We're making it into a movie, but we're not going to turn this one in, okay? So go to File, go to Export, and then add this to your render queue. Down here at the bottom, this is your render queue. So you have these blue words. Click on the blue word that says lossless, like right on that word that says lossless. This will open up your output options. We always want to save this as a QuickTime file. And then under the format options, we want to choose H.264 from that video codec. Okay? So every single time, without exception, we're going to choose QuickTime and we're going to choose video codec H.264. And then you can hit OK there. We don't have audio, so you can just ignore the audio part. It says not yet specified right here. Click on that word. And then inside your 2540 playing folder, there should be a movies folder. You can call this your last name underscore test scene or ball or whatever you want to call it. And then you can hit render. So this process will go 10 times quicker. There you go. 10 times quicker than the other one did, because it's simply just taking those frame stacks and smashing them together into a QuickTime video. And if we go into that movie folder, we should see that movie ready to go right there. Beautiful. Okay, another thing that would have helped us be able to even see that the ball is moving is if our ground had maybe a grid on it. Then we could see the ball moving, because it's obviously the ball's moving and not the grid moving. Or some sort of texture, even just anything would have helped that. Okay. These little things where we have very minimal items. So I have basically a flat material on the ball, flat material on the ground, plain color in the background. Are good ways for us to test out some of these things just to see how well this animation is playing as far as speed goes. But definitely for end results, it doesn't help. So even if you were to do a bouncing ball, you could still do this as a test, but for a final, it wouldn't work. Okay, it's fast. It rendered in 15 minutes at least, or at most. Sweet. All right, cool. So when yours finishes, you can make it into a movie if you want. We'll go through this process again. That's all that we're going to do for today. Before you leave, back up your Winter 18 folder. Also, on the P drive, take the Maya folder and drag that into your folder as well. So you want to back up the Maya folder, and you want to back up that Winter 18 folder too. That way you have all of your stuff that you will need. When we come in next week, you will be able to start on the Game of Thrones assignment. We'll start off walking you through it, and then you'll be able to kind of customize the stuff as you go. Okay? Questions? All right.